My name is Amélie Canal-Vallée, and I am the director of CAnD3. And today we start us off on a very timely topic for Canadians. So pension, retirement savings account contributions, and other also registered savings accounts. The Lunch and Learn that will be given by Maude Pugliese. So next slide, please. So first, I want to recognize, of course, the amazing partnership that is CAnD3 and all the partners that contribute to it day in, day out, have been contributing for 5 years now and counting. So this is an amazing achievement, and I am so ever so grateful for the support from McGill University for hosting this institutional grant, as well, of course, as the support from the Canadian the SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, for the financial support that has made this initiative possible. Next slide, please. And of course, as we start on this new year that is full of opportunities and hopes and dreams and also potentially challenges, we want to remind ourselves that we at McGill are located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples. Et passant en français, la reconnaissance que ce territoire a rassemblé des peuples autochtones de diverses nations, notamment les nations Haudenosaunee et Anishinaabe. Et nous voulons reconnaître que les divers peuples autochtones qui ont marqué ce territoire sont maintenant joints par des peuples qui nous joignent de partout dans le monde et que c'est une richesse que nous espérons conserver à travers les années, à travers le potentiel et qui nous permet à CAnD3 de rejoindre du monde à travers le monde aussi. Donc, next slide, please. So today we will let our speaker talk, unless she's willing and interested to engage with you and spar with you throughout the talk. But usually at CAnD3, we let the speaker talk for 40 minutes or so. And then we have a period of Q&A, moderated Q&A in this session. So that would be our rules of engagement. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Miles Taylor, who is organizing this seminar series and will be introducing our speaker. Miles.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm so excited to introduce our speaker today. Maude Pugliese is an associate professor at the Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique at Université du Québec, and she also holds the Canada Research Chair in Family Financial Experiences and Wealth Inequality. She also leads the Partenariat de Recherche Famille en Mouvance, as well as the Observatoire de Réalité Familiale du Québec. Sorry about that. Her current work focuses on intergenerational transmission of wealth, the management of debts and assets within diverse families, and their impact for inequalities, especially along gender lines. So thanks again, Maude, for being here with us, and I can't wait to hear the talk today.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Miles. Thank you, Amélie, for inviting me. So let me just concentrate a moment as I share my screen. Why am I not seeing the notes? Okay, here we are. Okay, can you confirm that you are seeing the PowerPoint and not the notes and everything?
It's all good.
Perfect. So yes, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'll be talking about contributions to tax-favored savings account in Canada among men and women. I just want to mention briefly before I start that this is actually really new work for me. I've literally just started on this project like a few weeks ago. So I'm really into the analysis. I had been thinking about it for a long time. I thought it was interesting, maybe for fellows of the program, to see research at this stage. And also, I guess a bit more selfishly, I was excited to get your comments on what could I do better, how could I push it forward. So I'll be looking forward to what you have to say about this. So I will start by just briefly defining what this is, the favored savings account, and why I think it's important to study the contributions of men and women. Then I will briefly outline what I think we can expect in terms of differences between those groups over time, and finish, of course, with the data, methods, the results, the good stuff that everybody wants to see. So tax-favored savings accounts, they're kind of a generic term to designate any kind of like registered accounts that people can save into and that carry some kind of tax advantages. The advantages, they can vary. Sometimes the investment income that is generated will be tax-free. Sometimes it's the contributions, the annual contributions that will have a tax deduction attached to it. And in Canada, there are many different programs. And generally throughout I would say maybe not the world, but certainly North America and Europe, this is a kind of policy that's been really kind of growing. It's increasingly popular to kind of like nudge people to do things and save for specific purposes through those kinds of tax-favored savings accounts. So you see here like a partial list of what we have in Canada. And in this study, I will focus on two programs. So the registered retirement saving plans, so this is RRSPs, and the tax-free savings accounts, so those are TFSA. And the reason why I focus on those two is because they are really like a key part of the Canadian retirement income system. So let me describe it briefly. It's usually described as having three pillars. So the first one is old age security guaranteed income supplement. And this is like basically like a basic pension, a basic income for seniors, for all seniors. And so that's it's a small amount of money that everybody or mostly can count on. Then the second pillar is the Canada Pension Plan and the Quebec Pension Plan. Quebec has its own little thing here. So that's a huge part of the retirement income system. This is a mandatory contributory public pension plan. So employees and self-employed people, they contribute. The employers also contribute every year. And eventually, upon retirement, there's a benefit that will be calculated based on time spent in paid labor and also compensation received. It's designed, however, to replace no more than 33% of average earnings. So this leaves a really big room, right, for this third pillar, which is private pensions and wealth. So this pillar has really two quite distinct dimensions. The first one is workplace pension plans. So some employers, they offer pension plans. Employees contribute and they eventually get a pension. And the other dimension is personal wealth. So any kind of assets, investment, savings, home ownership even, that can act as a store of value that can be used to generate income in retirement. So it's really important to emphasize that all three pillars are actually strongly supported by the federal government, sometimes also the provincial government. And in pillars 1 and 2, the support is very obvious. It's program spending. So it's actual transfers to people. So that's very visible in budgets and all of this. In pillar 3, it's a bit different. What the federal government does is to incentivize employers to provide pensions and people to build personal wealth through tax incentives. And so for the pillar 3B, the personal wealth, the two key programs really are the RRSP and the TFSA. And I'll say more about each of those programs, what they actually do in a minute. But before, I wanted to show you that even though they are a bit more invisible, right? Because those types of expense, they're called tax expenditures. It's not like visible spending. It's more like income revenue that the government doesn't get because it gives tax incentives. But still, it's a key part of the federal cost to supporting retirement income in Canada. So here, this is a figure I took from a report from the Library of Parliament that kind of describes the cost of supporting retirement income at the federal level. And so the blue is the Pillar 1 cost, the yellow is Pillar 2, and the gray is Pillar 3. And here in red, I've sort of like circled the RSP program and the TFSA program, right? And so you see that in terms of tax expenditure, tax revenue that the federal level government does not get, this is for 2021, for our RSPs and TFSAs, it was like $19 billion, which is about 10% of the total cost of supporting the retirement income system at the federal level. So that's not marginal at all, even though it's a bit invisible. Yet, there's still very little research on participation into those programs. Who contributes, who, like, it's still like not very common, and especially I could find nothing on gender differences in contributions to those programs. And I think it's actually an important thing to look at, and here is why. So, of course, I mentioned that pillars 2 and 3A, so the Canadian pension plan and the workplace pension plans, they are a really important part of the pension system, but they tie pensions to time spent in paid labor and compensation for it. And still today, as I'm sure you know, women shoulder a larger portion of unpaid reproductive work, and that means they participate less in paid labor and earn lower incomes. So overall, this means that women have a much lower pension income than men by 17%, according to a recent report. And so they depend more on Pillar 1, right? Like the basic income, but also on personal wealth, on whatever they can manage to accumulate, and participation in our RSP and TFSA programs. So this raises the question of like, how well are women doing compared to men in terms of wealth accumulation? And we actually know very little about this in Canada, and this is true also in other countries, due to data collection practices. So in existing household wealth surveys, wealth is conceptualized as a household good, right? Instead of being measured for each member. So basically, this means that for couples, we assume through those surveys that, like, you know, the partners, they just share everything and there is no inequality. But we know from research that like this is not true. There are inequalities within couple in wealth ownership. And actually for wealth held in our RSPs and TFSAs, actually by definition, it cannot be held jointly, right? Because they are associated to tax incentives. And so really they have to be personally held. So that's a kind of a problem in the general understanding of gender wealth gaps. But thankfully, we have in Canada administrative tax data so basically data from tax returns at the federal level, and they offer an opportunity to explore not the overall gender wealth gap, but at least the personal contributions of men and women to our RSPs and TFSA. And so this is what I'll be looking at today. And I think this helps to fill like holes in the literatures on gender gaps in wealth, in pension, and also in participation in public programs supporting retirement income. So what can we expect in terms of like gender equality or inequality? Let me start with the registered retirement saving plans, so the RSPs. This is an old program. It was introduced early in 1957 to incentivize workers, especially those not covered by workplace plans, to save for retirement. So I won't go into all the tiny details, but basically people who work with a labor income can contribute every year. And their contributions are tax deductible, but up to a limit. So currently it's the lesser of 18% of labor income, or about $30,000. So the tax deductible, it means like the amount contributed, it reduces your taxable income. So basically, because of this tax deduction, right, it means that first, one is eligible, right, to this program as a function of one's income, but also there's kind of like a bigger incentive for higher income people to contribute. So because higher income people are in higher tax brackets, there's kind of a bigger gain, right, to contribute and reduce the income taxation. So that's one feature of our RSPs. Another feature is that investment incomes, they are tax-free as long as they remain in the RSP account. But however, there's a pretty strong penalty when we withdraw the funds. So whether we need the funds before retirement or at retirement for income, once we take them out, they add to taxable income. And also, importantly, they enter the eligibility calculation for the Pillar 1, right? The OAS, GIS, for other social programs as well. So it means if we take out the money and we receive, you know, benefits from either a OAS or GIS, or maybe child benefits if I needed it before retirement, my benefits might change depending of how much I take out of my RSP account. So that's a pretty big penalty. So I mentioned it, let's just like restate it. Women, of course, they still take charge more of reproductive and care work, so they have more paid work interruptions, lower income by 28% compared to men as of 2021. And so for these reasons, I expect that women will contribute less to our RSPs for several reasons. First, due to lower income, they're not as eligible for it. They do not have the same incentives to contribute, and also not the same capacity, right? Because one needs income to save. But also, I think potentially the withdrawal penalty might hurt women especially strongly, right? Because they are much more likely than men to receive income in the form of government transfers, like parental leaves, like child benefits, like OAS, GIS, the Pillar 1, as I mentioned. And also their care duties, right? They might also create an aversion to the illiquidity of savings held in RSPs. If women have on the back of their minds that like maybe their children will need something at some point, having their savings tied in this like really illiquid form might not be so great for them. So that's kind of the first hypothesis. The second one is that this gender gap in RSP contributions should be really linked to family dynamics. So be marked among parents, also be explained in large part by the eligibility of some women to the RSP program, and of course their lower income more generally. And lastly, of course, we know that over time, women and mothers' paid labor force participation has improved a little bit. There's been a reduction in the gender pay gap, and that's especially true in Quebec because of the family policy introduced in 2006. So perhaps over time, this gender gap in RSP contributions, it has actually narrowed, and perhaps especially in Quebec. And now let me turn quickly to the contributions of men and women to the tax-free savings account, the TFSA. This is a completely different program. It was introduced in 2009. to facilitate retirement savings in lower income groups and also encourage savings like more generally. And so here, everybody can contribute every year, and the ceiling is universal. Currently, it's $7,000 a year, so it doesn't depend on income, on labor income. The contribution is not tax deductible, so there's no particular, incentive to contribute depending on income level. And the key gain is that investment incomes are tax-free in those accounts, and there is no penalty to withdrawals either. So basically, like withdrawals, they do not add to taxable income or enter the eligibility calculation for other social programs. So this means to me that probably the gender gaps should be narrower in TFSA contributions than they are in RRSP contributions, right? So basically the eligibility and incentives to contribute to TFSA, they do not depend on labor market income, although the capacity to do so might. So there might still be a small gender gap there, but not as big. And also the absence of withdrawal penalties might be especially attractive for women. So this is the fourth hypothesis. So here's the data that I employ, right, to explore those four hypotheses. So I use the longitudinal administrative data bank. So this is a 20% sample of the annual T1 family file. So this is basically data that are from the federal tax returns. It's also constructed using like other source of data, like the immigration file and the postal code file for like demographic characteristics. So those data are available from 1982 to 2021, but in this study, I focus only on the 1991-2019 period because of like some inconsistencies and some of the variables outside of this period. I also focus only on people between 25 and 65 because those are the retirement saving years. And also, I had to exclude the territories, right? Because even though it's quite a large sample, the sample was, they were still too small for the territories. So overall, it's about 60,000 individuals that can be followed up for 28 years. And that the sample includes nearly 1 million person years. So the independent variables are the following. So for RRSPs and TFSAs, I have the net annual contribution. So basically contribution minus any withdrawals by year for each year. And one interesting thing for TFSAs is that this information is actually provided by banks to the government. It's not from the tax returns. And so banks provide the total value of savings in those accounts at year end. So that offers kind of a more cumulative view than just the annual contributions. I don't have this for the RRSPs. So what I did instead to reach a kind of more, a cumulative view is for people I was able to follow for the entire period. I calculated the sum of their total annual net contributions for all of those years. So the main predictor, of course, is the sex of the respondent. And I have a bunch of control variables that are used in some of the models. So they include age, the province of residence, immigration status, presence of children, conjugal status. An important other variable is I have access to the maximum deductible amount for RSPs. So basically the eligibility of people to this program and also to their total personal pre-tax income. So I can talk more about like how those variables are actually constructed by Statistics Canada in the question period. So the analytical strategy is, I mean, it's quite simple. And I think at this point, I very much see the results that I'm going to be presenting to you as still very descriptive. As I mentioned, this is new work. But so basically what I'll be doing is first give a general overview of the overall gender differences in contributions, first for RRSPs and then for TFSAs for the entire period. So those are population average general linear models that estimate the differences in contributions between men and women when controlling just for age, survey year, and the province of residence. I'll look at like patterns across provinces, across age groups as well. And then to explore the role of family dynamics and paid, unpaid labor dynamics, I'll look at differences depending on the presence of children. Also using fixed effect linear models, I'll be measuring the change in contributions following birth. So following the arrival of a child in the household for men and women. And finally, I'll explore how the gender gap changes once we control for eligibility to participate into the RSP program and also income. And the final analysis are more about time trends. I'll just look at whether the gender gap seems to have changed over time in Canada and in the four most populous provinces. So here are some results. So let's start with RSP results. So here what you see are predicted values, right? Predicted net annual contributions for men and women that were obtained from a model controlling for age, the province of residence, and the survey year. And the predicted value are at the mean value of those controls. So basically all results that I'll show from now on are those kinds of predicted values from models. So as you can see, so this is the average gap between men and women for the entire period covering between 1991 and 2019. So we see that on average, women have an annual contribution of about $1,000, and for men, it's like closer to $2,000. So it's almost double. So that's a pretty important gap. It is observable in all age groups, but it's a little bigger in the older age groups here. The gap also between men and women, it is observed in all provinces. And actually, it is especially large in the Atlantic provinces, and particularly in Prince Edward Island. Men in this province, their contributions are over 4 times that of women. So that's a pretty big gap in relative terms. Here you see that the gap between men and women in net annual contributions, it stems both from women being a bit less likely to contribute any amount compared to men, and also among contributors that their dollar contributions are lower also on average. And finally, this is the more cumulative view that I've mentioned. So this is for people that I follow for the entire period, and this is the sum of their net annual contributions for 1991 and to 2019. And we see that men's total contributions stand at nearly 90,000 Canadian dollars, and that's roughly double the contributions of women. So that's a relatively important gap. Now, is it tied to family dynamics? Here, what you're seeing are coefficient estimates from regressions, right, that predict the annual contributions of men and women to RRSPs. And so this is a coefficient estimate for the sex variable. So it's the gap basically in contribution among women compared to men. And there's an interaction with the presence of children. So among people without children, we see that the gender gap is much smaller actually than what it is among people with children. And here is the same kind of information, but presented a little bit more differently. I identified people who, I think probably had a child. So basically, it's people that did not declare any minor children for 3 years in a row and then declared one. So this year T, where the children arrives, they're probably new births, and we see that for women, those are fixed effects regression results. For women, there's a clear kind of decline in RSP contributions following births, and that's not a pattern that we see very much for men. So clearly this gap is related to the care responsibilities of women, which I mentioned have for effect to reduce their labor income and probably eligibility for the RSP program. And this is what you're seeing here. So on this first, on the left side here, what you're seeing is the proportion of people without any deductible room. So those are people who cannot contribute to RSPs. And this is 16% of women during the 1991 period to 2019, compared to a little under 10% for men. And those are here the maximum deductible amounts. We see that men have much more room to contribute than women. Now, to see if this explains the gender gap, what I did is I did a series of nested models. So the baseline here, what you're seeing is the coefficient estimate from the regression. And it shows you basically the women's gap in net annual RRSP contributions when controlling just for age, province of residence, year of the survey. And here we add demographic characteristics, so it doesn't change much. And here is what happens when we control for the maximum deductible. So it explains a part of the gap, but not all of it. And when we finally add income, then the gap is completely explained. So basically, for women that earn the same income as men, they contribute just as much to RRSPs as men do. And it's really kind of the key explanatory factor. So did the gap change since 1991? So as I mentioned, I thought that maybe the income gap has improved over time, and perhaps this has helped to change the RRSP gender gap. So let's look first at the evolution of the pay gap. So here what you're seeing is, so here, this is women's income gap in 1991 at the beginning of the period. So they earned about almost $25,000 less than men in 1991. So this is a coefficient estimate from a regression that predicts net annual contributions. And those here on the right side are the interaction coefficient estimate. So basically a 0 here, it means that, for example, in 1996, the gap between men and women in 1996 was almost exactly the same as it was in 1991. Okay, so what this graph is showing is that basically the income gap, it didn't change so much during the period, except relatively late in the 2000s, where it seems to have improved a little bit. However, if we look at the same data by province, we see interesting patterns. First, in blue here, you see the patterns for Quebec, right? So if we follow the line 0, we see that clearly in Quebec, this is where the income gap has improved the most, right? The gap, the income difference between women and men has become less negative over time. And for some reasons, we see that in Alberta, there's not been any improvement. It seems to have gone maybe worse even over time. So did this change the RSP gender gap? So here we see, so what I'm showing is the evolution of women's gap in log odds of contributing to RSPs. So what we see here basically is that like it did improve women's chance of contributing to RRSPs got closer to men over time. And here what you're seeing is that like this is especially true in Quebec here in blue. And the last piece of analysis I wanted to show you on this time trend to get like a more cumulative view on everything. I was able to follow 5 different cohorts, so between 32 and 39, and get their total contributions for this period. So here you see the gap between men and women in their total contributions between 32 and 39. For people born between 1960 and 1964. So the gap was like a little over 7,500. And here you see how this gap has changed for subsequent birth cohorts. And so basically for people that were born 20 years later, between 1980 and 1985, this gap was $2,000 less. So the gap has improved by about 30%, but there is still quite a significant gap, even for people born in this like more recent cohort. So basically, there is a sizable gap that did get better over time. So now if I turn to the TFSA contributions, I'm presenting some of the similar analysis, and recall that I expected the gap to be smaller, right? And actually, it's really interesting that there is no gap at all. Women contribute even more than men to TFSAs. Not by a lot. So women like between 2009 and 2019, they contributed about $1,000 a year, and that's maybe 100 more than men. So that's a 10% difference. And also women's advantage, it gets like even more pronounced among older people. That's also a pattern that we see in almost all provinces with like maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. And interestingly, we see it even in Prince Edward Island, right? And this is where we saw the biggest gap in RRSPs. So the women have an advantage in TFSA contributions, primarily because they're more likely to contribute, because when both contribute, the amounts are relatively similar. And here is just to show you the total value of TFSA savings at year end. And here also we see that in Canada as a whole, women's savings are larger than men's, and this is true again in almost all provinces. Just quickly before concluding, I didn't see any differences in those patterns depending on the presence of children or not. Women's TFSA contributions do not change significantly following births. So really like those contributions, they seem much less tied to the child rearing responsibilities of women. However, when we take them at the same income as men, women contribute even more. So clearly there's something interesting for women in this particular program. So to conclude, there is a really important gap in RSP contributions in all Canadian provinces. For the 1991-2019 period, the men's contributions were nearly double that of women. This gap narrowed a little bit, however, during this period. This gap is explained largely by paid labor, unpaid reproductive work dynamics that reduce women's income, their eligibility to the program, and the attractiveness of it as well. Women contribute more in contrast to TFSAs than men. And as I noted in the beginning of the presentation, I think it could be due to universal TFSA eligibility, the absence of differential incentives to contribute based on income, the absence of withdrawal penalty, but right now I cannot really say. And so I'm hoping in the coming weeks to conduct maybe interviews with men and women regarding their contributions to learn more. We need more also on within fiscal optimization strategies. So I'm hoping also to look a bit more at what goes on within couples. Just a quick word also that I'm working on multiple robustness checks because the distribution of those variables are a bit weird, very skewed, zero inflated. Unfortunately, the disadvantage of the LAD data is that it doesn't have much in terms of socio-demographic information. So I can't really say much on differences by, you know, SES groups or racial groups, for example. And so just in terms of takeaway, I can't say whether, for example, the introduction of the TFSA program really helped reduce overall gender wealth inequality, right? Perhaps women saved in other accounts and they shifted everything in TFSAs or things like that. I can't say that. But clearly, this is an attractive program. And I think what we should take away from it is that when we have savings program that detach savings from paid labor income, and that also have the liquidity that are called for by women's caretaking role, then women very much participate. And I think this is something we should keep in mind as we reform the system. So to know more about the gender wealth gaps, I think you already received maybe this paper, so you can check it out. And also, I just wanted to mention quickly that at INRS, we have master's and PhD programs in études des populations that you can also check out. And thank you.
Merci. Thank you, Maud. This was a nice plug to your program. We indeed count several fellows in this year's wave that we're very happy have joined us. So thank you for this. And please, everybody, join me in this virtual round of applause for this. Really, as you had stated it on LinkedIn, I think that you yourself were surprised about some of these findings. So these, I think, are very thought-provoking ones. And so I want to invite folks to ask their questions. But while people are collecting their thoughts, I just wanted to drop kind of a thought that connects with some of the work that we've done also with work-family conciliation, but similar data. And we've actually found that in the Atlantic provinces, employed women were more likely to be employed in areas like education and healthcare. And I thought, contribution room is related to income levels, but it's also related to crowding out from other pension sources. So if folks are employed in unionized, like areas with good pensions, employer pensions, they may not have a lot of room to contribute.
Yeah, that's a good point, because indeed, like this is, so if you have an employer pension, then like the room is lesser. So yeah, and so you saw that this was specific to the Atlantic provinces.
In our sample, which was the
Interesting.
CCSS Canadian Community Health Survey, we had more respondents. Women who were employed were more, there was like a disproportionate share in the Atlantic provinces of them being represented in education and healthcare. And we know this, obviously, this was like significant for the Atlantic provinces, but we know it just made me think, oh, these are jobs with good benefits typically, and so maybe they don't have the room.
Yeah, but I think, like, generally speaking, right now, like the women are more like, they're less likely to, like, their pensions are lower, but they're more likely to be like participants in
Exactly. So Nancy is asking because of the pension adjustment in the contribution room calculation. Exactly. Yes, correct. This is what we're talking about. And it would also explain why they're contributing to the TFSA still, right? Because they don't have
it could help, definitely.
So maybe just looking, I don't know if the LAD has that data on the types of occupations, or it probably has something.
I mean, so because in some models, but it would be interesting to look at the province difference, because in some model, I actually have the contribution room. So like, and yeah, so, but no, there's no data on, I could see like if the province differences.
Well, you could look at contribution room and income. So if it's like, if contribution room doesn't follow from income, right? Like if it's disproportionately lower relative to the
Yeah,
income,
exactly.
then you have a hint that they have
They have those pensions. Yeah,
that there's a contribution room, the pension adjustment. Yeah. Good. And you have comments here in the chat. Janice is saying this makes sense as the AC Atlantic provinces, AC, have less
Atlantic Canada has less.
Thank you.
You know, like major car manufacturers, you know, that kind of thing. So women tend to be more likely to have to be in those traditional roles of teachers, nurses,
yeah, that's
as good jobs, so to speak. Yeah.
It's
a really interesting presentation. Thank you so much, Maud. I really enjoyed it. It's great that people are looking at this, and it kind of raises more questions in my mind about how we prepare for our retirement as women. So yeah, really interesting work.
Well, thank you, Janice.
And if you have further questions, I'm going to go to questions, people who raise their hands, but please come in line for sure. Nancy, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question, please?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Nancy Wilson. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce. And one of the campaigns or advocacy issues that we're working on is actually parental leave, or, you know, within this context, maternity leave, and, you know, uncoupling it from the paid waged labor force. And one of the reasons for that is, you know, because maternity income during maternity leave is not considered earned income for RSP purposes, which essentially philosophically it's equated with unemployment income. So I do apologize. I think I got the time wrong and I missed the beginning of your presentation, but was the maternity leave income impact on contribution room included in the sort of impact on the decrease in RSP contributions?
Well, I think it's definitely part of the, I wasn't able to look directly at decomposing like maternity leave and so on, but like one thing I'm working on right now is to look at the difference, and especially in Quebec, because, you know, there was this introduction of this particularly generous parental leave. And clearly in Quebec, you see that like post 2006, there's been much less of a drop in income, right, for women following the birth of their first child. But like you see no difference in RSP contributions. Like this is what I'm seeing right now in like even more new analysis that I didn't even like present. And so, yes, I think that's exactly what goes on. The problem is like, yes, we've replaced income, and we do this a lot for women. Also, it's the same with children allowances. Yeah. They are meant to help the incomes of women, but because they are not counted and considered as labor income, then like it messes everything up for the purpose of retirement preparation. Then they are kind of like excluded from all the, because it's also the same for the Canada pension plan.
Right.
Like
it is, but there is a form that you can fill out that excludes periods of the years where you didn't reach the max in CPP.
Exactly. So you're not penalized for like years where your labor income was, or your income was smaller, but you still can't contribute.
Yeah.
Right.
Fair,
so
fair.
So yeah, so I think that's an area of like research and policy change that could be important for women's old age security going forward. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that you guys are looking into it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your input and for joining us. And as I mentioned, also, this like if there's a TFSA, but it's not a tax break, so there is still a loss there. So people can have money grow income free and then not have to pay taxes when you take it out. But I think you're gonna have to work with an actuary or something to figure out like how
Figure out what's
$1,000 here and there, what would be
yeah, totally.
the best optimization. Merita is next. Merida, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Sorry, it took me time to open the camera and voice. I really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much. Excellent and so many important information. I really congratulate you for this work. I felt that this resonates with some aspects that I've heard into a discussion lately. There was a term that was referred to, especially the workload burden on women having a sandwich career. I probably have heard it as well, where women are mainly the ones now that are carrying the burden of care. We know before there was a lot of burden on childcare, and you've mentioned a lot about it, but now with the growing trends on population aging, apparently there is even an additional layer of care that is kind of attributed to women, especially on the parts where with more aging population, apparently, and very expensive services for people to use the retirement homes, this burden is kind of adding up to women taking care for their parents and other elderly. Now, what I was interested to hear from you was, I'm assuming when you looked at the income aspects of your research, were you able to identify the gender gaps for the same professions? I feel like that is an important aspect that somehow probably later on contributes to the gender differences in earnings and therefore retirement savings later. Were you able to identify such sectors?
No, unfortunately, but I'm sure like this has probably been done like in some other by some other people, because like the downside of the LAD, so the tax data is like they provide information that we don't have otherwise, for example, for RSPs and TFSAs, but so we don't have the profession of the person. We have basically almost like no other, very few demographic characteristics. So that's not like something that I could do by profession, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm sure that like I have like Tammy Sherrill or Nicole Fortin come to mind. Like I feel like they probably have some studies that like have used survey data on income, like the labor force survey, for example, to like look at gender differences by professions.
Yeah, great. And my last question, you've used longitudinal data, which is excellent, and so many years. I'm interested to hear on your methods. What methods have you applied in order to capture the trend, the change over time?
Yeah, so for now, like what I did was really basic, like general linear model. So basically where I pull everybody together and I model the correlation, right, between the observations, because it's from the same people every year. So when I pulled everybody like this is what I did. And the time trends for now are just like, yeah, as you saw, the interactions between like the sex variable and time, or sometimes between the sex variable and birth cohorts. So it's very, very descriptive data. And in a certain sense, I almost haven't exploited the longitudinal structure of the data at this point. So yeah, this is something I'm hoping to do in the coming months, like pursuing work on this project.
Great. Thank you so much. Congratulations again. Excellent
you.
research. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Merida, for joining us again. Merida is an alum of the CAnD3 program. I see, yes, I have a question from Mohsen. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to what Merta said, in terms of method, I think like with this type of data, maybe like comparing both like random effect models and like mixed effect models would be nice, because like if you say like in 2008, if like look at the US, so with the like economic crisis, many people lost jobs, and that's also a factor. So the problem with like simple mixed effect model is that like you treat each year the same, yeah. So the result could be like different, like if you enter like the year as random effects. So that would
No,
be
that's a good point. Yeah, I'll definitely be digging more into like how to approach the description, and maybe it makes just also the sample size are so huge. Like, I think I could literally do like separate analysis for every year. So yeah, that's another option, certainly. Thank you for this suggestion.
Thank you. Are there other questions? We have time for just one more, probably. Not to cut the conversation short. Yes, Priscilla Benoit. Yes, Benoit.
Yes, hi.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emily. I know Maud, she's my supervisor, so we have similar interests. I'm also I'm a PhD student in the Institut National de Recherche Scientifique, and we could talk a bit more, Maud, about this very interesting findings you have there. But I wondered if there would be a way to measure the impact of the deployment of the TFSA on the RRSP. Sorry, the letter, I mix them up sometimes, but because maybe there is a displacement with the introduction of this new saving account. I wonder if there is a way to dig more this question.
Yeah, it's hard with those data just because, so I have the RRSP information, but I don't have the savings elsewhere. And so it's a bit complicated. I don't think I can actually do it. Oh, yes.
You would have, if they have investment, they need to declare investment gains.
Yeah, but it's only investment income. So yeah, I know other people have tried to, like economists around the time when it was introduced, they didn't look at the gender aspect, but they like, I know some of them concluded that like basically what happened is with the TFSAs, like people took what they had in regular bank accounts and they just shifted it to, so I think there is some displacement. Yeah, but I think it's very difficult to it's difficult to tell. Yeah, what I could look at is if, and I've tried to look a little bit at it, but to see if like women shifted from RSP and to TFSA, and it doesn't seem like it. You know, like you don't see, for example, in 2009, you see just more contributions by women to all the accounts, but I think without a more complete view of people's assets, it's hard to conclude on like the impact of it.
But then you have your qualitative interviews that maybe will.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like this might be like it might be a really good opportunity for a mixed method projects. Like
I wonder also, I would suggest maybe you want to talk to financial planners.
Yeah.
They may
know. Because one thing I was wondering is also, could the financial planners also
they will be influencing
recommend this also to like specifically to women? I have no idea. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe they should. Maybe this is something you know, now we have a Chamber of Commerce, but we should make sure that next time the financial planners organization is also involved or
Yeah,
invited to this. Thank you so much, Maud. Please, everybody, join me in thanking Maud for this really fascinating talk and thought-provoking. We advertised it as such, and you totally delivered. So we are now at time. So can we please go to the next slide, please? So if you like this talk, please join us. We have one every month at the same kind of time at noon, from noon to 1 on Wednesdays, the second Wednesday of the month. And so next month, we're going to be hearing from Assistant Deputy Minister Emma Okani, who will be talking to us about exploring Government of Canada's AI strategy, of course, barring any unforeseen other events that are befalling the federal government these days. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that Assistant Deputy Minister will be able to join us for this talk, and that you will too be able to join us again. So please sign up for our newsletter, and so to make sure that you don't miss any of our Lunch and Learns. And on that, I'm going to wish you again a very happy new year, and hopefully, yes, information session. Those of you who are trainees, please join us for the CAnD3 recruitment information session. It's already this time of year. We are recruiting next year's cohort right now. And so please join us at our for this information session. We're going to be looking forward to hearing from you if you're not already part of the program. So folks, have a lovely day. Thanks for joining us for this Lunch and Learn. And I'm going to wish you a great day and a great rest of the year, hoping to see you every month.